Let me have the privilege of presenting to you an eminent panel of experts who will be discussing on energy access issues or energy poverty issues or providing energy for all in Philippines. We have Mr. Raul Saniel.
Jose Raul Saniel.
Yeah, he's General Manager and CEO with Zamboanga del Sur Electric, Zimesco 1. He is also President of the Rural Electric Cooperatives Association, the PhilReca, which has 121 member cooperatives. He is the Vice President of the Board of Directors of Rural Electrification and Financing Corporation, REFC, and Rural Electrical Trading Organization, RETC. So please welcome, join me, give a clap to Mr. Jose. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Then we have with us Mr. Urbano Mendiola Jr., Vice President, Corporate Affairs, National Power Corporation, Philippines, where people prefer to call him Bong Mendiola. He is usually called that way. He has more than 37 years experience in various aspects of plant engineering, construction, quality assurance, contract management, regulation, trading, a vast experience. Please join hand, welcome Mr. Bong Mendiola. Our third panelist for the day is William Ruccius, or Bill as he prefers to call. He is the Business Development Director for Enfinity Asia Pacific and a co-chair for the Independent Power Producers Forum Philippines chapter. He has more than 2 decades of experience in various countries of Asia, and I'm told more than 5 years, 6 years in Philippines. So please join my hand to welcome. I would first like to start the discussions with our panelists giving their views on the theme, maybe 2 to 5 minutes each one. We can start with Bill. How do you feel about the issues? And then we can go specific questions from the floor otherwise. Yeah.
Well, I will say one of the things that I think National Power Corporation here in the Philippines did very well was the missionary electrification program. There are, 7,107 islands in the Philippines. Many areas that it's not economical to hook up to the main grid. And over the years, NPC was able to provide electricity through their rural electrification program, or missionary electrification, and created these SPUGs, small power utility groups. I think today there's over 200 of them, right? I believe. And at the time, the only viable solution for the generation was diesel. And the cost of that generation that is subsidized by all the rest of the customers through a universal charge. But they did a very good job of getting electricity to these very remote and rural areas. Today, there's also a very good program where they're trying to privatize these SPUG programs. There's a very good cash incentive program for private investors to come in and take over the generation or take over the generation and distribution part through the qualified third-party program. The only problem is that it's kind of a long process to get the approval, get the plant built, and actually start making some money. You can make some very good money, but too many approvals. You have to go through Department of Energy. You have to go have the project reviewed by National Power Corporation. You have to have a review by the Energy Regulatory Commission, and you also have to work with the local distribution utility who has the franchise for that area. They have to waive their franchise rights for that particular area to be able to go in and do the qualified third-party program. But I give National Power Corporation credit for trying to privatize and through the privatization process also provide electricity for more hours in the day. Some of these areas only have electricity for 8 hours a day to 16 hours a day, simply because of the budget constraints on the cost of the generation. The privatization program can provide up to 24 hours a day of electricity to these areas. But there's a lot of opportunity for private investment in these off-grid areas. The program is very good. There's a cash incentive that is very good rewards. The process just needs to be a little bit easier.
Thank you, Will. And Bong, can we have your few words on the starters?
Thank you very much for that somewhat good assessment of National Power Corporation. The National Power Corporation is basically their mandated role is missionary electrification, watershed and dams management, as well as operation of the undisposed generating assets, which are being sold by PISAM. But in the missionary electrification, William Iris was very right that the government is really trying very hard to electrify a lot of areas, particularly those areas that are not yet electrified. And that's where National Power Corporation is coming in to provide electricity in new areas. Of course, we have certain partners from the private sector, what we call the qualified third parties, that will have to come in to support also those areas. Because government has also limited resources, and therefore we have to prioritize electrification of certain areas. And in trying to come up with electrification programs, we have to really prioritize those areas that have already some critical loads that probably we can actually already viably electrify. Like for example, having 6 hours operation or service, because in the new areas, sometimes there is not really very much load during the day. The load is always during the evening. So it's really very difficult that we have certain gensets that will have to design for day load and at the same time during the night time. And the load is really very low during the daytime. So what we are trying to do is just plant the seeds for progress by putting up the capacities that are needed during the night. And once the load improves, then that will have to be, we'll have to increase the operating hours in those areas. And as the operating hours increases, then there would be a possibility at a certain time where the private sector they come in, because it's already viable and they can already put up 24 hours operations in those areas. The other programs that the Department of Energy is also doing is basically trying to accelerate electrification of these areas and trying to accelerate. In fact, the government targets 90% electrification by 2017, and therefore there's really a need for all the agencies of government, including the private sector, to really team up to come up with electrification programs that will actually benefit those remote areas. So these are on the way, and I think the Department of Energy is really trying very hard to put up these policies in order for this accelerated private sector participation to come in.
Thank you. And Joseph.
Thank you,
Yeah,
JK.
please. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. The perspectives that I'm bringing into the topic comes from the point of view of electric cooperatives that are one of the principal actors of rural electrification program in the Philippines. Looking at the topic, I would see it's not actually the explicit cost when we say about the most important, most expensive power is to have no power at all. But it is on the foregone opportunities for people to improve their lives, and for, of course, those foregone benefits, especially for rural areas, to improve economically. So this is actually our point of view. For the Philippines, we have actually made significant strides as regards electrifying the rural areas. But of course, there are so many challenges that we are facing right now. As we all know, when distances already increase, and of course population already densities are low, plus of course the problem as regards access roads. So the investors, actually private investors, would be probably discouraged to come in or invest. So this is where the Philippines, actually Philippine government, through the Department of Energy, National Electrification Administration, and rural electric cooperatives come in. So we have done a lot actually when it comes to electrifying the rural areas. In fact, the current direction right now, the government is pursuing this very aggressive program, which is the situ electrification program, which will electrify actually not only the barangays, remaining barangays in the Philippines, but the sitios. The sitios actually are the smallest geopolitical unit in the Philippines. So we are now going to that direction. And what we are serving right now are those rural folks that are mostly farmers, fisher folks, and really those people who are in the low bottom of the pyramid. So this is what we are doing right now. And as I've said earlier, the government is really pursuing this aggressively. In fact, the rural situ electrification program is targeting around 32,441 situs before the end of the term of President Benigno Aquino. And out of this 32,441 situs, around 16,000 already, 21,000 if I'm not mistaken, have already been completed. And so we expect that as we continue aggressively, there will be more Filipinos who will have access to basic electricity. Well, again, in the Philippines, we think electric cooperatives think, of course, the government, it should be government-led, and the government must continue to pour in robust resources so that the rural electrification program of the government will really be achieved. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph. It's really reassuring to hear you and understand that we are on the right track. But I would like to add here, you know, last month, in month of May in US, there's a meeting in UN for the global tracking framework of UNSC for all. And a very interesting finding came, I was reading this recently, that the world is heading in the right direction to achieve universal access to sustainable energy by 2030. But we must move faster to achieve the goal. Now, we know the problem, we know the solution, we are on the track. But do you think we are going at the right pace or right track, at right pace of work to meet the demand? Because the total level of people not having access to energy is just still 1.1 billion. Last year it was 1.2 billion, it's this thing. And the second figure is the people who don't have access to clean cooking and heating. It's hardly come down. It's still 2.9 billion or 3 billion people as last month's report in the UN. So while we have the problem, we have the diagnosis, is the treatment very slow? Are we allowing the patient to die? Or do you think that we need to speed up our activities so that we can reach out to people by 2030 as targeted by the President and by the Parliament and this thing? So do you think that we are on the right track, and what more needs to be done? Is it the bureaucracy or the red tapeism as Bill mentioned, or is it that the technologies and resource, or is it the skill? What are the challenges to speed up this activity of reaching out to the last Filipino to have access to energy 24/7? What are the challenges? I'll go one by what you feel about it. Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you. There are already existing laws, policies, and programs that are in place, actually, and in fact, all these programs are already providing, or we have already achieved significant gains on this as regards electrifying or energizing the sitios or the rural areas. My point of view is that the government investments as regards energizing the rural areas must be government-led. And of course, assisted by the private sector and of course donor countries. As I've said earlier, there are few investors already in the rural areas. That's why it should be government-led, and government must provide robust resources so that we will be able to meet our goals of providing all households or households in the rural areas in the Philippines with access to energy or electricity. And then secondly, government must, of course, push or support technologies, especially renewable energies, that will provide access, low-cost access for people who are in the rural areas. But as I've said earlier, in fact, I already mentioned some projects that we are implementing right now, like the Sitio Electrification Program, which is already making good strides in energizing the rural areas. So what we need to do is they should not be only for this, let's say, future leaders, of course, of the Philippines, must continue to provide support to the rural electrification program should we want to succeed in fully energizing the barangays.
Thank you. Bill, in your opinion, is it the policy challenge or the financing challenge which is more critical for projects? You know, whether you talked of bureaucracy or the process and too many approvals required, and which is discouraging investors to come in the area, or is it the inadequacy of financing instruments, or is it the improper revenue model which is discouraging? Because too heavily government dependent will also, I think, the lopsided.
Well, first, Raul, I can't remember the number, but the percentage of people in the Philippines that have access to electricity, do you know what that is?
Right now, according to the study made by the PIDS, Philippine Institute of Development Studies, there are still 16 million Filipinos who have no
16 million.
16 million.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, the problem that we see as a private investor into the electrification of the rural areas, there can be a very good return by doing it. They have very good incentives. The only problem is that the DOE made a study themselves, and they said to go through the process to get all the approvals and everything takes at least 4 years to do a rural area that's maybe less than 1 megawatt. 4 years. So that's their study. So in reality, it probably takes 5 years to be able to develop this project and get it into operation. This is for solar plants that only take a couple of months of construction. So that's very discouraging. The other part also is that less than 1 megawatt plant doesn't attract too many bank investors to give you loans. You've got to package together maybe a bunch of these and get about 10 megawatts. Well, with the length of the process, that's an awful lot of work for 10 megawatts. So it's kind of discouraging for the private sector to do. I know DOE is working on trying to streamline the process, but we'll see what happens. But for private investors to do this, that's why private investors have not come in and done this, even though the economic returns are very good. So I think back when NPC was the vertically integrated utility, they could go out and, like I said, they did a very good job of electrifying the rural areas. Since the privatization has occurred, the emphasis has been on the big generation and privatizing things. NPC has not had the funds to go out and continue with that electrification program. So I guess so it's slowed down, to answer your question. I think they did a good job before, now that all the privatization is occurring, well, they've kind of lost their budget, and nobody else has picked it up. So the electrification in the rural areas, I think, has slowed down. And I guess I agree with Raul. If you want to pick it back up again, it's either got to be led by the government, or we've got to make this process for private investment a lot easier.
When it comes to you, then the National Power Corporation is doing a very good job connecting people. But how do you see this grid connected versus renewable off-grid power meeting the needs of the Philippines? And what role can National Power Corporation do in reaching out to these people? What are your views? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I would like to again thank William for that wonderful statement about NPC. But National Power Corporation, in coordination with the Department of Energy as well as the National Electrification Administration, are pursuing certain projects in the missionary areas. And basically, what we are also doing is that aside from putting up the programs that are needed, that's why what we will be probably providing the private sector is indications on what are the opportunities in the missionary areas. And William has indicated that it is quite rewarding also to go to the missionary areas, particularly in renewable energy, because the law has provided 50% cash incentive for missionary RE generation. So if a RE developer goes to the missionary areas and put up, of course, the renewable energy resources or facilities, and they generate in that area, their generation will be entitled to 50% cash incentive. And that's, I think, a very good come on for private sector to come into missionary areas, because even though the quantities are small, probably it is also rewarding for RE developers to come in. So we in National Power Corporation are starting to also adapt hybriding it with our diesel plants, some solar technologies like solar and wind. In fact, we are preparing the terms of reference for the solar hybrid diesel in the Masawa, and soon we'll also be preparing some wind hybrid with diesel in Batanes. So those programs, we wanted also the private sector to come in, because there are also a lot of opportunities for RE to come in the missionary areas, particularly for those areas wherein the cost of producing energy is a little bit higher as compared to the main grids.
Thank you. I would now like to open the house to the floor, and if the people would like to ask some questions to the panel, kindly introduce yourself and direct your question to any of the panelists. You can, there's a mic placed in the center. Kindly come, and any questions from the floor? Yeah, there's a gentleman here.
Hello, Chef.
Good morning. Would you say that the prevailing law, our IPIRA, is constricting the ability of every organization, whether it be cooperative or private, to invest in penetrating these unelectrified areas in the Philippines?
I think the PIRA is not restricting the private sector to come in. In fact, it is the declared policy of the state as provided in the law to attract capital investments in electrification. So I don't think it's not restricting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good morning. I would like to address this question to Mr. Bill Ruccius. Hi, Bill. You said that similarly there is a lack of sufficient funding or investment in the renewable energy. What is the opportunity for multilateral banks to provide or to invest in renewable power projects here in the country? now that you are with Enfinity Asia Pacific? Is there an opportunity for multilateral banks to invest so that there will be additional funding available for renewable projects in the country and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, of course?
Well, I know ADB has these programs, and they talk a lot about it, how easy it is to get those funds. And again, a lot of these rural areas that we're talking about, you're installing 500 kilowatts to maybe 1 megawatt. And it's a very small project. Even for ADB to loan to a small project like that requires so much work for the small investment. The private banks, they don't even want to look at anything that small. You've got to aggregate it. If you can aggregate it and put together at least a 10 megawatt bundle of projects, then I think you can attract the investment. But again, the process is just too long. 5 years to develop a less than 1 megawatt project. And I know there's some work being done to try to shorten that, but
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Unfortunately, our time is running out. We have a next keynote address from DOE. So I'd like to thank our eminent panelists for being here and sharing your wisdom with all of us. And we look forward to further discussion during the speed networking after the session. People would be coming and walking up to you. We have this orange and blue envelopes lying on this thing. People can mix after the session. Thank you. Give a big hand to our eminent panelists.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for saying. Thank you.